Hi! I'm Sylvia from Vintage Kitchen Vixen, where I share tips for simple living, creating memorable gatherings, and preparing wholesome and traditional meals with a vintage twist. And today I'm going to be going over 15 old-fashioned skills that we should work to reclaim. So there are several reasons why you would want to learn any of these old-fashioned skills that we're covering today. One, you feel good when you make something by hand. We spend a lot of time in front of television just kind of like absorbing what other people create. So when we take the time to create something ourselves, that's really powerful and it makes us feel good. When you give away a handmade gift, like that's something that comes from the heart. It took your time, it took your effort, and it's just so much more meaningful, especially if it's something that you use in your own home. So, if you have a blanket that you knitted or crocheted, that's going to have a lot more meaning than something that you got from HomeSense. Also, these skills are going to save you money. So one of the skills, just a sneak peek, it's budgeting. Everybody should know how to budget and, manage a home. Budgeting plays a huge role in that. There's the self-sufficiency aspect, to have that sense of control, to have that power back, be able to do things for yourself as opposed to relying on corporations to get the job done for you and just giving it to you on a silver platter that you pay money for. So, there's time and convenience that are reasons why you wouldn't do any of these things for yourself, but you're paying for it in other areas, like your health, for instance. I think another important reason is for posterity's sake, to be able to have skills that you can pass down to your children. There are a number of skills on here that I never learned from my own mother that she learned from her mother and her grandmother, so I kind of feel cheated that I'm missing out on those skills that I could easily been transferred down to me, because now I need to learn them so I can transfer them to my children. I want to be able to make them as self-sufficient as they possibly can be. If they have a rip that they don't go to a seamstress, they can mend it themselves. So without any further ado, I've already referenced a few of these. We're going to go into what these skills are. The first skill is one that everybody should know how to do, and that's cooking from scratch. Now the big question is, why don't people cook from scratch anymore? Well, that's not to say there are a lot of people who cook from scratch, but there are a lot of people who don't. A lot of people think they're cooking by putting a frozen pizza in the oven, or when they're making a box of macaroni and cheese where everything is pre-done for them and all they have to do is boil the macaroni and then put in some butter and milk and this like powdered cheese, non-cheese thing. There's a lot of processed foods in people's diets because they save time, they're convenient, and with people aren't at home and they don't have time to cook. But time shouldn't be an issue. Like, even if you are in that situation, you can still cook from scratch. You can prepare freezer meals for the week, and there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to cook from scratch. With that question answered, why should we cook from scratch? Well, for one, it saves you money. It also costs money, especially if you're using quality ingredients, but not everybody can afford those quality ingredients. Like when you buy an organic chicken that is sustainably raised, you're gonna spend $20 on that chicken, and meanwhile you can get 2 chickens for like $10 sometimes if you get them on sale. So that's a huge difference, and it's just something as simple as knowing what to do with that chicken. You can get 3 or 4 meals out of that. So learning how to cook from scratch is so important because it does save you money in the long run, and you can really stretch your dollar when you do it too. And also, foods that are prepared from scratch, they're usually more filling. So for example, it's a lot more filling if you make your own macaroni and cheese than it is to get something from a box that has no vitamins and nutrients in it. At least you're gonna get real cheese and real butter and real cream, which you could also waste those ingredients on a box of pre-made stuff. But it's the same concept with a pizza. Like, you're gonna have something that's a lot more filling and wholesome with a pizza that you've made from scratch. Like from the dough, I kind of cheat with the sauce. I don't always make my own sauce, but the whole idea is that you're gonna have a much more filling and a pizza that goes a lot longer than something that you get that's frozen. For me, the biggest reason why anybody should cook from scratch is the ingredients that you find in a lot of these processed foods that are ready to go. So if you can make your own tomato sauce, for example, even if it's just from a can of unsalted tomatoes, like crushed tomatoes or diced tomatoes, you're going to be in a lot better position than a can of pre-made pasta sauce, which some of them are really high quality and they are really good, but they're also very expensive. At least this is what I find. once you start reading the labels and also realizing the marketing behind these ingredients, because you know, people see sugar now and they don't want to get sugar, so you know what, oh, what if we call it evaporated cane juice? That's still sugar. And I'm not saying sugar is bad. Well, sugar is bad, but if you have something that's a lot more natural, like, you know, if you can use honey instead of sugar, you're in a lot better position. When you're cooking from scratch, you have that control. You can control your ingredients. You can decide how much sugar you put into something. You know whether or not MSG is going into your food, and there are just so many additives. You have additives to preserve shelf life. You have additives that thicken something. You have additives that stabilize, that emulsify. And yes, they last longer, because if these food companies are able to stretch to extend the shelf life for as long as possible, that's more profit for them and for their investors. So it just makes perfect sense why they would use these additives, but it does not make perfect sense for you to put the money in their bank account. So I always say vote with your dollars, and one of the biggest areas that you can vote with your dollars is making your own food from scratch. The second skill kind of lumps in with the first one, which is cooking from scratch. The second one is baking. I always shudder when I see people putting like these bags of bread in their carts, like, you know, the soft squishy loaves. Those are so bad. Like, the ingredients that go in them, they just make me cringe. You know, you see somebody putting a whole bunch of healthy things in their cart, and then they put in the bread, and it doesn't even taste good. It tastes sweet. Like, bread isn't supposed to be sweet unless you're getting like a honeyed loaf, or you're getting like a cinnamon breakfast loaf. All you need to make a good loaf of bread is flour, water, salt, and yeast, not sugar. It's so rewarding to bake your own bread. And then it's the same thing with the treats. Unless you're going to a bakery and getting something that's made with real ingredients, usually the cheaper stuff, it's also made with cheaper ingredients. So for example, the other day I saw these really cute heart-shaped cookies for Valentine's Day. I really wanted to get myself a pack of these cookies because they were of the soft sugar cookie variety, and they had, you know, really cute icing. And then I looked at the ingredients and I saw shortening, or maybe it was margarine. Anyhow, whenever I see shortening or margarine or like hydrogenated palm oil or anything that's hydrogenated, I usually turn and run the other way. And then, I mean, there's also just so many other bad ingredients that goes into these things, but I figure if I'm going to be spending calories or like eating these calories, these treats best be made with butter. So the best way to control those ingredients is to make it yourself. So instead of going out and buying like a huge box of chocolate chip cookies, make your own, and then you can bake a reasonable amount. You're not going to eat a whole box of cookies, so you can bake a reasonable amount, and then you can freeze the rest and bake them for later. So, I mean, it's always nice to be able to bake chocolate chip cookies without having to go through the whole process. I love freezing chocolate chip cookies. And then also with industrialized baking, when I was training in baking and pastry, I also had to train and learn how to bake treats the way they would in an industrial plant, like an industrial factory. And the ingredients that some of these things contain are just nasty, like the emulsifiers that go into cakes or that go into cookies. Like, you open up that bucket and you want to hold your breath. It's so bad. And then of course, like baking, the evaporation, the steam, like it gets rid of it. But if you have a butter tart that's made with shortening versus a butter tart that's made with butter, the taste is so different. Like, it's incomparable. Like, you're gonna want the butter every time, because shortening, especially once it's out of your diet for a while and you have something with shortening, it tastes disgusting. Like, shortening's bad. It's just hydrogenated vegetable oil, and there's a whole that's a video for another day. Like, I'm not going there today, but look into it. The third old-fashioned skill is knowing how to sew and to mend. Now, I personally can't sew. Actually, I'm learning this year. This year, one of my goals is to learn how to sew, and so far it's been very slow progress in learning. It's just because of the time factor, and I also have this little toddler running around, and You know, he sees what I'm doing. He's very interested, to the point where I sometimes poke myself with a needle and I'm terrified of poking him. Anyhow, point of the matter is, like, it's an invaluable skill to be able to hem your own pants or your husband's pants instead of bringing them over to the tailor or to the laundromat who ships them over to the tailor. So it's just being able to do that is so powerful. To be able to mend your favorite shirt, you know, that, you know, sometimes you get a little hole here, to be able to mend that together without even thinking about it. It's wonderful. Like, it saves you money on the shirt. You're reducing your waste, because otherwise that shirt might end up in the waste, or it might just be sitting for years in a closet for you to take it to the dry cleaner so that they can take care of somebody to mend it for you. Why else would you want to learn how to sew? Like, when you know how to sew, like, you can make things for yourself. And yes, sometimes it can be expensive, especially like pretty fabric can be very expensive. Oh my goodness, can it be expensive? I know some people are starting to make a lot of things with drop cloth. So for example, you can make your own curtains using drop cloth. You can make a bed skirt out of drop cloth. So there's a lot you can do with drop cloth, which is super cheap. You can also repurpose something that you get from the thrift store. If you find nice fabric there, sometimes you can get your hands on fabric. Sometimes you might see like a fabric that you really like out of an old shirt, and you can use that to make something. So knowing how to sew and knowing how to repurpose fabrics and materials, I think that's super valuable. And it doesn't have to be expensive if that's how you operate. So the fourth skill kind of goes hand in hand with sewing, but I think it's very valuable to know how to knit or know how to crochet. Personally, I can't do either of these. I tried learning how to knit before, and it's something that I actually really enjoyed learning how to do. I didn't do it well. Like, I just knew like the basic purl stitch, and I was getting to a point where I would knit and something was playing on the TV at the same time, and I didn't feel guilty watching something when I was also creating something at the same time. So it really helped to justify that time, because I really don't like watching TV all that much, because I don't like shutting down. But if I had something active that I was doing and making with my hands, I felt a lot better about that, because I knew all my concentration wasn't being sucked into that that box in the room. But to be able to knit or crochet your own blankets, your own mittens, your own hats, your gifts for people and toys, like, there's just so much you can do when you knit and when you can crochet, and that's money that you don't have to spend on a chunky blanket at the store that costs $70. Like, you can make your own. And yes, yarn can cost a very pretty penny, but you're going to be spending a pretty penny either way, so might as well put that pretty penny towards something that you're making yourself and getting the satisfaction that comes from it. If I did know how to knit or crochet, some things I would make or blankets, I'd make hats and mittens, and you can make really nice sweaters. I don't think I'll ever get to the point where I can make sweaters, but my mom, like, when she found out that she was going to be a grandma, she knitted a cute little hat, actually a couple of them. And, you know, one of her customers even like put together this cute little jacket and hat combo that was so adorable. I know my Oma, when I was growing up, like, my Oma and my aunt actually, they'd knit the most elaborate outfits for me. Like, they were gorgeous. Like, it was an art the way that they did it. And I really wish that's a skill that would have been transferred to me, because my Oma knits, my mom knows how to knit, and she knows how to crochet, and I don't know either of these skills. So I'm a little bit bummed out about that. And I'd like to learn one day. Like, I already tried learning, and then I kind of abandoned it because things happened in my life, and then I just didn't pick it back up. Maybe one day in the future I'll learn one of these skills. I'd like to, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. But if that's something that you want to learn how to do sooner rather than later, I strongly encourage you to pick it up. So number 5 is something that I started to do last year, and it's something I had been wanting to do for years and years and years, and I wasn't able to because I didn't have enough land. Although I did it to a degree on my balcony, but having land to do it is ideal, and that's having a garden, both for growing produce, so vegetables and fruit, as well as flowers. I started gardening not only because I like being able to watch things grow that I'm nurturing, but also because I love the reward that comes from it when you're spending time to nourish something, when you're spending time weeding and just watching everything grow and thrive, like there's just so much satisfaction that comes from it. Growing up, there was one point in my life where my mom had a huge garden and she would spend days canning. We had pears and syrup, we had dilly beans, we had she had canned tomatoes that she'd use all year long. Like we never ever bought like tomatoes from the store. We always used her good garden tomatoes that she canned. It was so good. Oh my gosh, it was good. But just so much produce. Like there was so many cans of good things. There was applesauce, and I don't even remember anymore. But she went nuts for a couple of weeks, and she'd be canning nonstop. And for the most part, I was in school while she was doing this. I had my own little patch in the garden. I grew radishes, and they were like monstrous. And for the most part, I forgot it because my mom didn't nudge me and be like, "Hey, like you should take care of your garden," because my mom also doesn't. She likes gardening, but she doesn't like weeding. So towards the end of the summer, usually most of her garden is weed city. I remember one year when I was in high school, she finally started up a garden again, and I helped her plant that garden. I actually planted the garden that year, and I was weeding, I was watering. I weeded every day, and it was just something I loved doing, pulling from that earth and that earthy smell, and just being outside and getting that fresh air and getting that sunshine and just being in contact with food that I was going to eat. And then I went to Italy for a month, and I'm like, "Mom, take care of the garden, please weed it." I came back, and guess what? There were weeds everywhere, and I got so discouraged that I don't even remember how that garden fared. I don't think it did very well. The best part about having the garden is having that fresh air and having the exercise that goes with it, and just there's so much enjoyment that can be had from a garden. Now, produce makes perfect sense why you would grow that in a garden, but why flowers? So flowers, they're not only just aesthetically pleasing, and I love going out and cutting flowers to bring them indoors and bringing a piece of the outdoors inside. Whenever I see a bouquet of flowers that's on my living room table or on my kitchen table or counter, like I get so much joy from seeing that, and it makes me incredibly happy and grateful. So that's one reason why flowers are great in a garden. The second reason why flowers are wonderful is that they are good pollinators to attract the insects that like pollinating. So for example, poppies, bees love them. They're able to get a lot of nectar from them. But flowers attract pollinators, and you want those for your garden because they help keep it happy and healthy. Another skill that kind of gets tied into the gardening, it's collecting seeds from what you do harvest. So this is something that I need to work on. I collected seeds from a squash last year, but nothing else that grew in my garden. Actually, no, that's not true. I collected seeds from my beans. Starting a garden can be expensive when you first get started, but when you learn how to harvest your own seeds, and you can use them the following year, and you can just keep working on that and building up your seed collection, it doesn't have to be as expensive as time goes on. The sixth old-fashioned skill is learning how to preserve your own food. So this ties into gardening, but it doesn't even matter. Like, you don't have to garden to know how to preserve food. In peak growing season, you can get bushels of tomatoes or cucumbers at markets. You can get them from the grocery store too if you're lucky, but markets you're usually able to haggle a little bit and negotiate for a better price. Sometimes, if you want, you can try. Or you know, at the end of the day, the vendor will be a lot more willing to let you worry about carrying that big bushel rather than them loading it back in their truck for the day. So you might be able to get a better price at the end of the day. Anyhow, the whole point is, when you're able to get large quantities of produce like that, preserving it is wonderful. So one thing that I started learning how to do for myself last year was canning. So like I mentioned earlier, my mom used to can all the time. I didn't learn how to can though. Like I didn't really watch her, I didn't help her. Even when she canned when I was in high school, like I was so useless in high school. Like I worked and then I was in my room like playing The Sims or chatting and like or spending time in chat rooms that I had no business being in. So I really regret not helping my mom can. I mean, I did help with the garden, I helped with the yard work, but when it came to canning, when it came to sewing, like I didn't want to learn anything. Like I was just useless. Anyhow, that's just a side note. So canning is one way to preserve food. So whether that's making sauces, whether that's making jams or jellies or chutneys or even, you know, pickling. The other way that you can preserve food is freezing. So there's also that skill which comes from experience. It comes from researching. So if you have a lot of raspberries or a lot of strawberries that you're getting or that you picked or that you got like for a super good price, you can learn how to freeze them. So, you know, you learn as you get the produce, and then that's information that you file away in your head for the next time, or maybe you keep a notebook so that you retain this knowledge. There's canning, there's freezing, and then also with your herbs. So my mom's garden when I was in high school, the side of the house, we had herbs all along the side of the house. And sometimes when we were cooking, we'd run out and like we'd harvest them, and they did very well. Like they were very happy herbs, but we didn't do anything to preserve them, and so they just went to complete waste. They served no purpose apart from like the occasional harvest for cooking. So some herbs, they're annuals, and they need to know exactly when to harvest them. So for example, last year I planted summer savory, and I did one harvest, and then it started flowering, and then it was gone. And I was so crestfallen because if I would have known that was going to happen, I would have just harvested everything at the same time, and then I wouldn't have lost all of my savory. And then that's another thing. When you learn how to garden, like you get lessons every year on how you can improve things. So I learned so much last year from my gardening experience that I'm going to be doing differently next year, and I'm actually doing a lot more to learn about gardening and how to improve my yields for the next season, which I need to start planning because it's February and I need to start getting my seedlings ready for the planting. Anyhow, preserving herbs, like herbs are usually very generous. You get a good bounty, so make sure that you make full use of that. You can dehydrate them. My favorite method is just putting them up in little bunches and hanging them upside down to dry, and then you can enjoy your herbs all year long. So when it's the dead of winter and you're making a stew and you're putting your own homegrown parsley in there, that's the best. Skill number 7 also ties into the whole skill of preserving food, but I am putting it in a separate category because it's super important, and I think it should be separate from preserving. But again, it's also a method of preservation, and that is learning how to ferment foods. And I guess the reason why I'm keeping it separate from preserving is because you can ferment more than just like regular food produce. Like you can ferment milk, you can ferment tea. The tea, by the way, is kombucha, and the milk is kefir. I guess cheese is also kind of like a ferment, but cheese would be a separate category, which I'm not listing today, but cheese making is another skill, and it's a complicated one, so I'm not going to include that in this video. The world of fermentation is a wonderful world to get into, and I am just starting to skim the surface of it. It's something I started doing last year. Actually, I've been exposed to ferments basically all my life. Like, if you check out my post on milk kefir, you'll learn all about how my dad used to make milk kefir every night and share it with my brother and I after sneaking in a little bit of cod liver oil, and it was just so good, and it's still good, and that's how I enjoy my kefir today. And then I also use it in a bunch of different recipes as well. Apart from preserving food, the benefits of fermented foods are vast. So for example, when you ferment something, it gets a boost in vitamin and mineral contents. They have a lot more enzymes, which is something your body needs. We eat a lot of cooked foods, and that's really taxing on our system, so it's important to incorporate raw fermented foods into our diets. Also, fermented foods are rich in probiotics, So that helps aid digestion. They're really great for your immune system. So in a world that is overly sterile and everything is being sterilized, people keep hand sanitizers in their coat pockets and they hand sanitize their hands before they shake somebody's hand, or they won't shake hands because they're scared of germs. And when you're so scared of germs that you feel like you need to sterilize everything, it really throws your whole system out of whack, because you're also harming that good bacteria that's in your body, that healthy gut flora, and then you see a lot of people getting sick. So when that sickness goes around in the winter, you catch every bug that gets sent your way because your immune system is compromised. So consuming fermented foods with these that are rich in probiotics, that really helps to offset that and kind of start to repair your system. And I'm not saying that's the only thing that you need in your life, but what I'm saying is that it's a good move to add it to your diet and to learn how to do it for yourself, even if it's something small like making your own sauerkraut or milk kefir. So 2 really easy ways to start fermenting foods. Another one is fermented carrot sticks, and I will be sharing a tutorial with you on that soon. I just don't know when, but it's coming. Number 8. Oh, this is taking a while. I can need a glass of water. But we shall continue. Time marches on. So number 8 is foraging. Now foraging can be a tricky one, because if you don't know what you're doing, you might pick something that is harmful to you. For example, a wild carrot, which is Queen Anne's lace, it looks, and you probably wouldn't want to eat it anyway, it looks very similar to poisoned hemlock. So like that's one important thing to keep in mind. Like, you don't want to accidentally poison yourself. And I mean, especially when it comes to mushrooms. I've never foraged for mushrooms. You want to know what you're doing. So whether that's having somebody guide you through mushroom picking, you want to have somebody with expertise who can walk you through that. But there's one app that I use. It's called Seek by iNaturalist. And basically it helps you to identify plants. Now, you can't always take information like that to heart, because maybe the app misidentifies something, in which case you might pick something that's harmful. But there are some things like garlic mustard, for example. It's an invasive species, and you'll know what it looks like as soon as you figure out what it is. It grows like a weed. And you can make pesto with it, and you can add it to salads for a garlicky taste. I'm going to be doing a post on foraging for garlic mustard when garlic mustard comes into season again, because you want to harvest it in the spring when it's early, because that is when the flavor is best. It's not too strong, but it's strong enough. So that's one example. Other ones that you could do, like foraging for sumac, foraging for juniper berries, foraging for, well, yes, there's mushrooms, but again, like, you really need to know what you're doing when it comes to mushrooms, because you don't want to accidentally kill yourself or your dinner guest. I got into foraging because of apps like Seek. I had a lot of fun identifying everything. It kind of is like a Pokemon game that I got into. I'm like, I gotta like collect all the species. I gotta collect all the birds. So I was taking pictures of everything. They're like, you've collected lamb's quarters. Couldn't think of anything. Or a plantain. So I was collecting all of these species, and then I'm like, okay, what do all of these do? So I feel like we've lost a lot of plant knowledge and plant lore and knowing the benefits of this. So like chicory, for example, that can be used to make coffee, and actually it's used to make fake coffee. There are uses to these plants, so we see them as weeds, but a lot of them have uses. Like, you can add them to salads. I have violets growing in my backyard, for example, and last spring, actually, I have a little video on violets, and I want to do another video this year, kind of like a part 2 to that, of different ways to use violets. But I made a simple syrup with violets that I used, and I turned it into cocktail. I tried making sugared violets, which was a terrible failure, but I had so much fun going around my backyard and picking violets. And it's the same thing with dandelions. Like, you can make a mean salad out of dandelion greens. You can even make dandelion wine and dandelion tea. Foraging is free. Like, you can get fresh produce for nothing at all. And yes, it's not cultivated the way like our lettuces are, but they're very rich in minerals. You just have to be careful of your neighborhood that you're in. I mean, if you're in the country, you're fine, but if you're in the city, like, you might want to be a little bit careful. Like, my next door neighbor, she like uses pesticides on her lawn, and I think like my lawn is pretty good. It's healthy. Like, you have all these different plant lives. It's not just grass. You can tell a healthy lawn pretty easily by its diversity. If it's just grass, it's not healthy. Skill number 9, and it's kind of a funny one, but it's using the whole buffalo. So if you're not familiar with that term, it kind of like, it goes back to the 1800s. You had the Native Americans and I guess the Native Canadians, the Native North Americans, they used the whole buffalo. So like when the settlers came over, they went nuts killing the buffalo, like, and they killed them just for their hides, and they'd leave everything else. But meanwhile, you had the Native Americans use everything, like everything from the bones, the hide, the meat, everything went to use, everything. And that's a skill I feel like a lot of people have lost. Like, there are some people, they will get a salad, like, you know, one of those cartons of spinach at the store, they'll put their dressing on it, and then they won't eat the rest. They'll just throw it away. And just, why would you do that? Why would you unnecessarily waste food? Like, it just makes no sense to me. Like, do you not know how many people are without food? Or even in wartime, like, that kind of waste would be unheard of. Like, my great grandmother would probably twist in her grave if she knew some of the food that has gone to waste in my own fridge in the past. Like, I used to be really bad with that. And I think a lot of us can improve in this area, but something small, like I save my food scraps, for example, like carrot peelings and onion butts and onion peels, like everything goes into a freezer bag. And when I make a big batch of broth, I will dump a bag in there, and I'll have everything from leek ends to shrimp shells. Like, I just keep everything, bones from chickens, it all goes in a bag. I have different bags, like I have a seafood bag, I have a chicken bag, I have a beef bag, and then I have a pure vegetable bag as well. Like, I have a bag of frozen pumpkin guts. I need to really make a pumpkin stock really soon, but I think you get the concept. And actually, if you want to learn how to make broth from scratch with scraps, I do have a video, because that's what I do. I make videos on things I do in the kitchen. Another thing, and this is, it's not something I haven't done before, but I'm going to learn how to do it. There's making pineapple vinegar using the pineapple core. So the cores and the skin, and you can make pineapple vinegar pretty easily. That'll last you a few months, so you can use that in salad dressings and when you're marinating. And then another thing that I want to learn how to do is making apple cider vinegar. So currently in my freezer, I have a bag full of apple cores that I've just been saving up, and then eventually, like, I have apple cider in my cupboard currently, and once that's gone, I'm going to save the mother, and I'm going to use the mother, this blob of goo, and it's the culture. Yes, I'm going to use that culture to ferment my own apple cider vinegar, so that should be an interesting project, and I'm very much looking forward to that. And another way, and this is another way that you can use the whole buffalo, and this is especially helpful if you have them, which I do not, and I really want them, but if you have your own chickens, you can also feed them that scrap. So that heel of bread, by the way, like, I save my stale bread and I make my own breadcrumbs with it, or I make croutons using it. But if you have chickens, you can throw them that bread, you can throw them those scraps, and they'll use it all, and they'll eat it right up, and it's great for their diets. So yeah, it reduces your waste, it stretches your dollar, and just the produce that you're buying, it's serving its purpose. Like, you're really stretching it out. You're wringing everything out that you possibly can from it, and it justifies its own purpose. Like, it's being used, it's not being wasted. Number 10 is stocking a frugal pantry. Now, I have a video that's all about my own frugal kitchen pantry. But when you have a well-stocked pantry, it's so much easier to eat at home. You're not going out and spending a ton of money on restaurants, which really eats away at your budget pretty quick. Like, it's amazing how much food costs. And food costs a lot of money to begin with when you're just shopping at the grocery store. Like, lately I've been seeing cucumbers, individual cucumbers, selling for $2.50, which is insane. I don't get it, because everything's grown in a greenhouse now. Like, why are food costs, why are they still going up? I know it's transportation fees and labor, but still, like, come here, come here. If you really want to know what I keep in my frugal kitchen pantry, you can take a look at that video. But just to give you an idea of what I keep on hand at all times, I keep beans, I keep a bunch of different grains, so everything from barley to rice and couscous. I keep shrimp and meats in my freezer, so I'll just give you a quick rundown. Those are some of the things that I keep stocked at all times. Number 11, this skill kind of goes hand in hand with the last one, and that is meal planning. So when you plan a weekly menu and you know exactly what you're going to be eating, again, you're a lot less likely to spend money on something that you shouldn't, or to go out and eat. If you have that battle plan, you know what you're getting when you go to the grocery store. So when I meal plan, I also make my grocery list at the same time, so I know what I'm spending, and then I'm also able to curb my spending a lot more on impulse buys. I mean, sometimes it's also fun to go out, buy your produce, and then build a menu around that, but I find that having a menu, it just takes out so much headache and guesswork from it, and you can eat healthier, and then it saves you money on groceries because you're not buying trash. Moving away from food, we have the 12th skill, and that surrounds laundry. So everybody has laundry, everybody does laundry, whether you're doing laundry at a laundromat, in which case it might be a little bit trickier to save here, but there might be at least one or two ways where you can cut down on costs, and you can also cut down on chemicals. I've always loved doing laundry. In high school, doing laundry was my task. Like, I did everybody's laundry in my home. I did my mom's laundry and my brother's laundry. Like, I was like a laundry maid. And I always had my system. I had my favorite laundry detergent, I had my favorite dryer sheets, and I just had my system. And I love folding warm laundry too. It just feels and smells so good. But especially over the last couple of years, the way I've done laundry has changed significantly. So for one, I make my own laundry soap, and I use wool dryer balls with essential oils to make everything smell good and clean. Doing laundry was completely different like 60 years ago. I really enjoy the conveniences of my washing machine and even my dryer in the winter. When I was living in Montreal a few years ago, I had one apartment and it had laundry lines, and everybody in that alley, behind in the alleyway, everybody had a laundry line, so everybody hung up their laundry to dry, and it was awesome. My last apartment, that's something that I really missed, was being able to hang out my laundry to dry, because there's nothing like the sun and fresh air to dry your laundry. Like, a dryer just does not cut it. When I moved into this house, I knew I had to have a laundry line, so I have one of those spinning laundry line things. I don't really know what you call them. Let's call it a laundry spinner. So I have one of those, and I love going outside and hanging my laundry, and I love it. And then taking it down, and it just smells like fresh air. Like, that's a real fresh air smell. And it smells so good, and it's warm from the sun, or sometimes at night, it's at night and it's cooler. And I know in the winter you can also hang your laundry outside, but here in Canada, like, we have so much snow, sometimes we have ice, and when it's sub 20 degrees, like, 20 degrees Celsius, you don't want to expose your hands to that kind of cold, like, to have wet and cold, and I think everything would probably freeze instantly. So I do not dry outside. I know I could have little lines going inside, but I really slack in that area, and I just throw everything in the dryer in the winter, and then I have that warmth. So those are a couple different ways that you can be old-fashioned about the way that you do your laundry. Number 13 is 4-part. It's about making products. I could have had an individual category for each of these, but that's making soap, making your own personal products, making candles, and making your own natural cleaners. So that's, I really could have broken this down, but I wanted to keep it to 15. Otherwise, I'm going to be talking forever. And I already feel like I'm talking forever. So if you're still with me, thank you so much. I'm so happy that you're still here, that you're still listening to me drone on about this. So I guess the question is, what's wrong about spending money on these kind of products in stores? I know you can get good versions of these products in stores, but they cost a lot of money. Like buying like soy-based candles or beeswax candles, they're expensive. It's also expensive to make them, but when somebody else is making them, the costs run higher too, because they still have that ingredient cost, and then there's the time and labor that they put into making them and using those resources to make those candles that they put up for sale. Like soy candles usually start around $30, at least where I am. They're not cheap, and neither are beeswax candles. It's the same thing with soap, and especially foaming soap. So I have a big issue with, I'm not going to mention the store, but every time you walk by, it feels like you're walking by a factory. I don't know, it just smells so overpowering, like you get a headache just by going inside the store. And you have soaps of every possible name, like I don't even know, like pomegranate cloud of, I don't know, everything smells like a fairy fart. Actually, there's more than one store that's like that, but the store that I have in mind, there are a lot of people like getting their soaps and getting their candles, especially when they have good bargains on them. And those soaps are just so full of chemicals. Like there's a reason that they smell the way they do. And you can easily make your own foaming hand soap. All you need is a foaming hand dispenser. Heck, you can even reuse one of those foaming hand dispensers from these stores. All you need is Castile soap, so I use Dr. Bronner's, and Dr. Bronner's even offers Castile soap in different scents. So peppermint is one of my favorites. Almond is another one. You can also just get a neutral, unscented soap and add your own essential oils. So you do half Castile soap and half water, and then you have a beautiful soap, and the lather is really nice. And I'd say it's comparable to anything that you get in the store, minus the crazy fragrances. Does your soap really need to smell like a candy cane? Just use the peppermint Dr. Bronner's and you'll be fine. Same thing with personal products, like from bath bombs to lotions. I'm not even going to touch sunscreen. That is actually quite scary, some of the things that go in sunscreen and what it's doing to the environment. I really suggest you look into that. I'm not going to talk about it. I don't make my own sunscreen yet, but there's a podcast called Wise Traditions, and they have an episode on sunscreens, and I highly recommend that you give that a listen to and do your own research into it. So I'll link that below so you can check out that podcast. It was like mind-boggling to me. Just something that I've always used and not realizing just how harmful it can actually be. So candles. I love candles. I love burning candles. I like the way everything smells, but you're also burning chemicals when you burn these highly scented candles, like whether, I'm not going to name any names, but you see them everywhere, and especially the cheap ones that you can get, or the ones that you can get on sale for $25. Like, there's a bunch of garbage in there. You don't want to be breathing that in. And it's the same with cleaning products, like that clean smell that we're so used to. Like, I have a whole post that's on natural cleaning ingredients that you should start using now. I rant a little bit about the commercial cleaning products that you can buy in stores, so I get really worked up when I think about it. You can check out the Environmental Working Group, or Workers Group, ewg.org, and they have a ton of information on cleaners. They actually grade cleaners to let you know how friendly they are to your health and to the environment. So I highly recommend taking a look at your own cleaners that you use and see what they have to say about them. There are toxins everywhere. Like, we can't stay away from them. They're in our water, they're in our food, they're in the air. Like, what's a couple more toxins? Like, so what if toxins are in my candles, or in my soap, or in my body wash, or in my cleaning products? Like, so what? Like, what's a couple more toxins? But the best analogy that I've heard, and I don't remember where I heard it from, but if there's a pothole in the road and you can avoid it, like, wouldn't you go around that pothole rather than just drive right through it? Like, if it can be avoided, why wouldn't you avoid that pothole? Like, why would you just drive over it when you don't need to, and then just do more damage going over the pothole than you would going around it? So that's the best analogy I heard. Like, if you can easily avoid something, why wouldn't you? But I'm really curious about, in that section, like, is there any of these, like, do you make your own soap? Do you make your own candles? Do you make your own body products? Do you make your own cleaners? Like, do you make any of these? Because I know it's something that our great-grandmothers did. Like, they made, maybe it's a little bit further in the generations, but they made their own soap. They made their own candles. Like, it was skills that everybody had. Like, sometimes they did buy candles. I think candles were mostly made out of tallow because most people had their own livestock, and then as people moved away into the country and into the cities, people didn't really make tallow anymore, and they didn't need to have that candlelight because they had electricity. And you know, when you have electricity, you don't need candles, and if you don't need candles, you don't need to spend money on them or learn how to make them yourself. I don't know, I just think it's interesting. But cleaners, like, before all these commercial cleaners came out, people didn't spend money on cleaners. Not really. Like, they made their cleaners with turpentine, or they used whale oil that comes from, I think, their brain or something like that. I don't remember. It's some kind of gland. So it was really popular in the early 1900s, and probably a little bit later than, or earlier than that too, but yeah. that was used in a lot of personal products and cleaning products. So that's not something we really have access to today. And I mean, they used ammonia, there was vinegar. So I mean, some of the cleaning products is like, we wouldn't use that today because that thing is a carcinogen. So there are some things that are vintage that aren't good, and it's a good thing we've moved away from it. But I mean, these skills I think they're already pretty important to learn. Number 14, we're almost done. Number 14 is learning how to throw a party on a budget. So I talk a lot about throwing memorable gatherings and being able to host a great party without spending a huge amount of money. So I guess for me, the biggest example that comes to mind is weddings. And why do people spend so much money on weddings? Like, you can use that money and spend it on a house, or you can use that money and put it towards your student debt, or you can use that money and put it anywhere besides a giant party that's going to last one day. Like, why does anybody need a $4,000 dress? I don't understand the wedding industry. It makes me really upset. There was this old Polish grandfather that used to be in my life, and he used to love talking about the parties that he used to host. He talked about a party that took place in a barn, and it just sounded like the best time. Like, it was a wonderful memory to him. And you know, people came from the church and then they went to this barn and they had this fine old party. Like, it was a shindig. And or even just like a regular party at his home, like, you know, he had ashtrays out for everybody because it was probably the 60s or 70s, or probably earlier than that, maybe even the 50s. And then he just made sure everybody had a drink, and they played cards and they talked, and they didn't need anything that was over the top. And I mean, you don't need anything that's over the top now. Like, I know some of my party ideas can get a little bit sophisticated, like hosting an oyster party. But I also advocate a lot of parties where there's swapping, whether it's swapping books, whether it's swapping soup, and even potlucks. Like, when your guests bring food, like, it really brings down the cost factor. You don't need a lot of money to have a good time with your friends. You can have a board game party. Gatherings don't have to be expensive. They can be intimate, they can be big, and it doesn't cost a lot of money to be hospitable. You just need to make people feel welcome in their home, and you need to make sure that they're entertained. And the best way to entertain people is to pay attention to them and be attentive to their needs, and, you know, make them feel at home. I don't think there should be a lot of pressure on big events. And I think a lot of that comes from the media and the kind of movies and TV shows that are out there. Like, we see these huge extravagant parties, huge extravagant weddings, and we see that and then we think that we need it. I mean, a cheap wedding, at least in Canada, a cheap wedding is $10,000. And, you know, it's supposed to be the event of your life, the event of your year. And it's just so much money. And why? It's sacrament. Like, I'm too frugal for expensive weddings. Way too frugal. And I mean, not everybody gives into the pressure of having a huge wedding, to have a lavish wedding. Not everybody gives into that. A lot of people are practical, and I'm not saying if you have a huge wedding you're impractical. If you can afford it, if you want to spend that money, fine, but don't go into debt for a wedding. Don't go into debt for a party. Do not go into debt. So that brings in the last skill, and that is budgeting. The number one rule when it comes to budgeting, I think, is don't overspend. Don't spend money that you don't have. I think everybody should have a budget because everybody has money coming in, and it's important to decide how that money is going to go out. You need to have some kind of budget. And it's something I'm always telling my younger brothers. I'm like, guys, like, you can't just be like happy about your money and spending here and spending there, and you're in debt. Like, if you're in debt, don't spend $150 on a beer festival ticket. Like, get rid of your debt because you're paying interest. When you have a budget, you have a plan, and when you have a plan, you can keep on track. Like, when you have a destination and you have a map, you know where you're going. So if you have goals for your money, you know where you can put your money. I think the best system for budgeting is the envelope system. So I use a product called You Need a Budget. And I actually have an old version because they switched to a subscription service, and I just use the software that I downloaded on my computer like 5 years ago. So I didn't switch to the subscription, but it's kind of like a digital envelope system. And I know there are so many different budgeting systems out there, and I think if you have one for yourself, that's wonderful, where you're able to allocate this money, like, you know, and then every time you get paid, you're like, okay, I need to put this money in for this bill, for these bills, and I'm saving up for a new computer, so I'm going to put $20 in that fund. So you're able to divvy up your money. So I should say, find a system, maybe even experiment with them until you find something that works for you, but have a budget your money. Because a budget, it's just a plan for your money. It shouldn't be painful. In fact, it should be something that brings you pleasure, because when you see your debts going down and your savings going up, that's a wonderful thing, and you feel so proud of yourself, and you're able to keep track. And when you're able to keep track, like, you become much more aware of your money, and when you're aware of your money, you can do wonderful things with it. You can watch it grow. You start accomplishing the goals that you want to do. You're able to save up for that vacation and that computer, and you don't go into debt for anything anymore except maybe a mortgage. But some people are able, when they're super aware of the money that they have, they're able to pay off their mortgage really quickly or their debts really quickly. But it all starts with having a plan, and that's what a budget is for. So those are my old-fashioned skills that most everybody should learn. I mean, there's so many other skills that are out there that you should learn. I guess it just really depends on what your preferences are. Like, I think other important skills that I'm not touching on today, like car maintenance, you know, being able to change your own tire or change your own oil, home maintenance, being able to fix a leak, being able to repair things, like, that's also an invaluable skill. And those are skills that, like, I'm more likely to learn how to knit and how to crochet than to learn how to change the oil in my car. Like, that's something I have zero interest in learning how to do. I'm very interested in my husband learning how to do that, but it's a little bit too messy for me. I'd rather putter around in my garden and get earth on my hands than I would getting oil on my hands. That's just a preference. So I'm very interested in hearing what you think about these vintage skills, these old-fashioned skills. Like, how many of these do you know or do? How many of these do you want to learn? Is there anything that you would add to this list that maybe I didn't manage to squeeze in this time? I'd love to hear, you know, if maybe some of these were handed down to you, or maybe you want to hand some of these down to your children. I'd love to hear from you. I'm always so happy when I do hear from you, so please don't hesitate to leave a comment. If you are new here, I really hope you subscribe to my channel and hit that bell notification so that you never miss an episode of the kitchen. Every other video that I do, there is a recipe, and I do this thing called silent film mode, so I really hope you're able to catch one of those so you can see where the vintage and Kitchen Vixen comes from. I mean, you know, I do talk about a vintage twist, but I'd love to have you in my kitchen for that next time. And if you are coming back here, you know how grateful I am to have you here. Thank you for tuning in again today, and thank you so much for sticking until the end. I'm so grateful for you. Thank you for being here. And yeah, if you like this video, please hit the thumbs up. Again, leave a comment. I love hearing from you. You always put a big smile on my face when you take the time to drop a comment. You can also share this video on Instagram. I do have a blog post as well, so you can check the link to that below if you want to see something that's a little bit more organized. I write a lot better than I speak, I think, at least, but that's also there, and I might hit some points that I didn't speak of here just because I think differently when I'm writing. Anyhow, that's it for me today, so thank you so much for joining me. I do put out 2 new videos a week, so I will be seeing you real soon. Bye! That's what I do. I make videos on things I do in the kitchen. Obviously. Come on, Sylvia. Come here! Come here! You woke up. Come here, honey.